Hello, viewers. Before we begin, we want to let you know that this is a fictional story created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real people, events, or places is purely coincidental. We are human storytellers sharing these takes to entertain, inspire, and touch hearts. Viewer discretion is advised.
He sat across from her at the dinner table, his glass of wine tilted casually in his hand as if it gave weight to the words he was about to speak. "Honestly," he said, his tone sharp and dismissive, "you contribute nothing. Everything falls apart when I'm not here to manage it." The statement landed like a hammer, reverberating through the air between them. Around them, the conversation of friends or family continued, unaware of the wound he had just inflicted, but she felt it keenly, as though each word had etched itself into her skin. She forced a small smile, nodding politely, hiding the storm brewing inside. Hurt flickered first, a flash of disbelief at the sheer arrogance of his claim, but it was quickly joined by anger, quiet and contained, simmering just below the surface. She could feel her pulse in her temples, her thoughts racing as she replayed every moment she had given herself entirely to the relationship, the family, the work they shared. She realized, with a chilling clarity, that nothing she had done mattered to him. Her efforts were invisible, her dedication meaningless. Yet she did not lash out. Instead, her mind began to calculate. Each smile, each polite gesture, each effort she had made had been absorbed by him and disregarded, but now she would redirect her energy. Quietly, deliberately, she decided that she would withdraw. She would stop giving where she was not valued. Silence would be her weapon, detachment her shield. The emotional stakes were clear. She had reached the end of being unseen, and the consequences of this decision would ripple through their world, whether he realized it or not. She remembered the countless mornings she had risen before anyone else, preparing breakfast while quietly planning the day for the family. The little rituals, making sure the children had lunches packed just the way they liked, checking homework, organizing schedules, had gone unnoticed by the very person who should have appreciated them most. Her hands had washed endless dishes, folded mountain-high piles of laundry, and tidied rooms that seemed to return to chaos almost instantly, yet she had done it all without complaint, without expecting praise. She had managed bills, tracked deadlines, coordinated appointments, and resolved conflicts with patience, often smoothing over tensions so the household could function smoothly. Her emotional labor had been invisible yet constant. She had been the one listening late into the night, absorbing worries, calming fears, providing encouragement when no one else seemed to care. And yet, all of this had been invisible to him. Every sacrifice, every effort, every tiny act of love and responsibility was either ignored or dismissed. She had learned to smile politely as he praised himself for managing the real work, unaware that much of what he deemed effortless had been made possible by her diligence. There were evenings she had stayed awake waiting for him to come home from work, making sure the children were asleep, the house in order, and his dinner ready, only to hear him complain about minor inconveniences as if she had done nothing. The thought burned inside her: how could someone so close fail to see what had been done? Her life had been a constant stream of giving, of organizing, of nurturing, yet the weight of it had never been acknowledged. And in that flashback, she felt the accumulated exhaustion, frustration, and invisibility that had been building for years. The audience could see the enormity of her contributions, the depth of her care, and the injustice of it all, and it became painfully clear that the man before her had truly failed to recognize the value of the woman who had carried so much for so long, silently, without complaint. The first signs were almost imperceptible. She stopped volunteering for tasks she had once managed without thought, letting minor chores slip from her hands. The breakfast table was no longer immaculate, the children's clothes sometimes left folded but untouched in the laundry basket. She no longer offered advice unsolicited, choosing instead to keep her thoughts to herself, her smiles polite but distant. Even small favors that once came naturally, a reminder to take an umbrella, a note in a lunchbox, a cup of coffee ready before he asked, were now deliberately absent. He noticed, of course, but misread the signs. He assumed she was tired, distracted, or perhaps simply losing interest. He frowned, whispered complaints under his breath, and occasionally made pointed remarks about things left undone, never pausing to connect them with a sudden shift in her energy. Each observation he made only fueled her quiet calculation, reinforcing the power of her decision to disengage. The symbols of her withdrawal began to accumulate. His calls went unanswered more often, her messages brief and factual, lacking the warmth they once carried. Tasks that she had handled flawlessly now lingered on desks, counters, and calendars, small but deliberate reminders of her absence. Her energy, once vibrant and responsive, had dulled just enough to unsettle the rhythm of his daily life. The tension grew, subtle but insistent, like a thread slowly unraveling the fabric of their household. He was aware of the change, yet blind to its meaning, creating a suspenseful dissonance. And in that quiet pullback, she found strength, a power in her absence that spoke louder than words ever could. The shift became undeniable when she began ignoring his calls and texts entirely. Messages stacked up on her phone, unanswered, while his attempts to reach her in person were met with quiet composure. Requests for help with the smallest of tasks, organizing paperwork, coordinating schedules, or managing the household, went unmet, leaving him frustrated and increasingly aware of the void her absence created. Each ignored call and unanswered question was a calculated move, a silent assertion of her autonomy and refusal to continue being taken for granted. Inside her, a struggle played out quietly. Guilt flared at first. She questioned herself, wondering if she was being too harsh, if the withdrawal was unfair or cruel. But the guilt was steadily overpowered by a growing sense of empowerment. Every moment she spent not reacting to his demands reinforced her sense of self-worth, her realization that she no longer needed to validate his ignorance. She could exist fully on her own terms, her energy no longer consumed by someone who failed to appreciate it. When he finally confronted her, his voice edged with anger and confusion, she remained calm. He demanded explanations, questioned her motives, pleaded for some semblance of the connection they once had, but she refused to justify herself. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke volumes, echoing louder than any argument could. Everywhere he looked, subtle symbols of her absence highlighted the cost of his dismissiveness. Papers left unfiled, meals unfinished, emails unresponded to, all small, deliberate gaps in the rhythm she had once maintained seamlessly. Her withdrawal was both a punishment and a revelation. It forced him to see what he had taken for granted for so long. Each neglected task, each empty space she left behind, was a reminder that her contributions had been real, valuable, and now deliberately withheld. The quiet household, once humming with her energy, became a mirror reflecting the consequences of his blindness and arrogance. The absence of her presence became impossible to ignore. The household, once orderly and alive with subtle rhythms only she maintained, now felt hollow and disjointed. Breakfasts were rushed, schedules conflicted, and the little routines that had smoothed over daily friction were gone. Tasks he had always assumed would happen automatically were left unfinished, piling up like silent accusations he was only beginning to comprehend. Even the children seemed unsettled, sensing the shift in energy and the lack of guidance that had once been so constant. He felt the impact immediately. Stress gnawed at him as he scrambled to compensate for her absence. He tried to manage meals, bills, and schedules simultaneously, feeling the strain of responsibilities he had never shouldered alone. Frustration bubbled at every small disruption, a forgotten homework assignment, a missed meeting, a delayed payment, and yet he still didn't fully grasp that the chaos wasn't random. It was the direct consequence of taking her for granted. Meanwhile, she moved through her day with a quiet, steady confidence. Free from constant demands and unappreciated labor, she felt her own strength more clearly. The contrast between her calm and his desperation grew sharper with each passing moment. The very spaces she left behind, empty chairs, unfinished tasks, quiet rooms, became subtle symbols of the weight she had carried all along. Every disrupted routine, every small failure in the systems she had once maintained, amplified the tension in the household. The void she left was more than practical, it was emotional. And as he struggled to keep up, the lesson became increasingly clear. Her absence was teaching him the depth of what he had overlooked, and the cost of his ignorance was now unavoidable. As the days passed, she found herself reflecting on the years that had gone unnoticed. Memories rose unbidden, vivid and unrelenting. She remembered the countless nights she had stayed awake, soothing crying children, helping with homework, or staying late to finish work that had to be done, all while he praised himself for handling the important tasks. She recalled rearranging schedules, juggling appointments, and making sacrifices quietly, often at the expense of her own rest or pleasure, without ever expecting acknowledgement. Each memory reinforced the pattern she had recognized long ago. Her efforts were invisible to him, taken for granted, assumed rather than appreciated. She thought of promises he had made, the ones he repeated in passing but never followed through. The reassurance that he would handle something, support a decision, or recognize her contribution had often been empty words, evaporating as soon as circumstances demanded action. Those unfulfilled promises had been small cuts, accumulating silently over time, shaping her quiet withdrawal. She remembered moments of compromise, when she gave in to his whims or priorities, setting aside her own needs to maintain harmony, believing it was for the good of the family or relationship. And yet, each compromise had been met with indifference, never recognition. These flashbacks did not ignite anger, they solidified her resolve. She understood, with a clarity born of experience, that her value could not be forced or begged for. Her quiet withdrawal was not weakness, it was strength, a deliberate boundary she had drawn after years of being ignored. The tragedy lay not in her absence, but in the blindness that allowed her countless contributions to be unseen, a reality that he would only fully comprehend once the consequences became undeniable. By the time he truly noticed, the consequences of her absence were inescapable. What had begun as small gaps in daily routines had grown into a chaotic reality he could no longer ignore. He struggled to manage tasks that had once seemed simple, preparing meals, coordinating schedules, paying bills, and keeping up with work responsibilities that had been balanced effortlessly under her care. Every overlooked email, forgotten appointment, and missed detail gnawed at him, each one a reminder of how much he had relied on her presence without ever recognizing it. The house, once seamless in its rhythm, now felt like a constant challenge, each day a new test of his abilities and patience. Emotionally, he was a tangle of conflicting feelings. Regret weighed heavily in his chest as he thought of all the times he had dismissed her, taken her efforts for granted, and failed to show appreciation. Anger simmered too, directed both at himself for his ignorance and at the situation that had forced him to face the reality he had ignored for so long. Alongside regret and anger, longing stirred, a desperate wish to undo the damage and reclaim the comfort and harmony she had always provided. But pride, stubborn and unyielding, prevented him from reaching out immediately, from acknowledging that he had been wrong, that he had contributed to the very distance that now tormented him. When he did attempt reconciliation, his words rushed and awkward. She met him with calm and measured composure. She listened but remained distant, her demeanor steady, her withdrawal intact. She offered no excuses, no explanations beyond what she had already shown through absence and subtle gestures. Each unfinished task, each silent corner of the house, and even the little reminders of her contributions, the toy left in the children's room, the notes she had written and left behind, spoke louder than anything he could say. In that moment, he realized fully the magnitude of what he had lost. Her value had been evident all along, woven into the fabric of their daily lives in ways he had never bothered to notice. Now, stripped of her presence, he confronted the depth of his mistake. Her quiet strength, her deliberate distance, and the symbols of her labor were lessons he could not ignore. He understood, finally, that respect and recognition could not be demanded. They had to be earned and cherished, and he had failed to do so. Ignoring her contributions had not been a harmless oversight. It had been a slow erosion of trust and respect, a quiet unraveling of the foundation on which their life together had been built. What he had dismissed as routine or unimportant had, in truth, carried the weight of stability, care, and commitment. The realization came too late for him to undo the consequences, but not too late for the lesson to leave a lasting impression. Silence, she had shown, was a weapon far more powerful than argument. By withdrawing her energy, her time, and her presence, she communicated a truth he could not dismiss, that value unrecognized is value lost, and respect withheld cannot be demanded. Her quiet exit from the day-to-day obligations, the conversations, and the subtle but essential labor of their life was not an act of malice. It was an assertion of her worth, a reclaiming of the dignity he had ignored for so long. In each unanswered call, each undone task, each empty space, the lesson was clear. True strength lies in recognizing one's own value and acting upon it, even when others fail to acknowledge it. The toy left behind, the notes, the unfinished chores, they were not signs of neglect but symbols of empowerment. She had given, cared, and sacrificed, and when none of it was honored, she chose to protect herself and assert her importance in the only way that would make an impact, by withdrawing completely. For him, and for anyone witnessing this story, the moral was undeniable. Underestimate someone's contributions at your own peril. Power does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers in absence, leaving a silence that speaks louder than any confrontation, a silence that teaches the true cost of being taken for granted.